Hey there, everyone, and welcome to You Gotta Meet. I'm your host, Stuart Knight, and today I'm joined by none other than Jeff Chu. Jeff has been a leader in business for over 2 decades, driving high-performing teams across humongous companies, such as Starbucks. You ever heard of those guys? Coca-Cola, heard of them? Procter Gamble, another big one, and is now currently killing it at Mother Parker's Tea and Coffee. On top of that, he's a husband, a dad, and a constant contributor to his community and the world around him. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to meet Jeff Chu. Mr. Chu, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see you, Stuart.
You like your intro?
That was a massive one.
Yeah.
I'll pay you later, I guess.
You got to live up to that now. It's like you're a superstar. Trust me, I know it. And for those of you who are maybe even tuning in for the first time or for many times, I have the rare opportunity with Jeff where I'm very lucky to say that not only is he a business leader that we have plucked out of the world of, in this case, corporate Canada to be on the show, but also he is a friend of mine, which is making this extra special. I met Jeff. I think I met you. I was thinking about it actually before the show. I think it was Frankfurt, Germany. Was that the first time we met?
It might have been. It was a little ways ago. Yeah, a lot of moons ago.
I can't remember because you were like that was the times when the business
competitions were happening, and you were giving us some tips about in our third or fourth university how we could compete against these other countries to present what we've done in little old Waterloo, Kitchener Waterloo. And
yes, it's so funny. It feels like a million years ago, and at the same time, also just yesterday, where we were thinking, you know what, prairie fires. We should do shots of prairie fires. That's a great idea. We're 19, we're 20, whatever we are. We're like, yeah, that's exactly what my liver wants right now. Well, and you know what? That just takes us right into the questions I have. And if those of you who are joining for the very first time, the way it works here is we ask business leaders to get on here and be real. And we talk about work, but we also talk about life, a lot about life. And give them an opportunity to talk about those things that maybe they don't always get a chance to speak about. And so I got a text message from a friend this morning out in Vancouver, and he's really concerned about the world that we're living in. And he was just asking me my thoughts about, like, God, it feels like the world's going to hell in a handbasket with all the problems that we're seeing on the news. And I thought, you know what? Why don't we just go right into that and open with that question for you? Instead of me answering it, I want to know what you think. Do you, when you look at the world around you, and you see some of the chaos and some of the good stuff, what concerns you the most? What do you think is one of the biggest problems that we're facing, and why do you think that is?
I think that's a great question. I think, as it is, June 2025, and recency bias has us upon us with the political dynamics, especially between the U.S. and Canada. That comes to mind, but I don't think that's the number one thing at the moment. I would think it's got to be it's got to be more global warming in the environment.
Okay.
And I think there's two. So that's one big one. And the other one is the divide between the haves and have-nots, I guess. Those in the first world versus, very much developing countries. How is that going to play out in the sort of medium, longer term future?
Right.
What are we doing really about, the green planet, blue planet we have here? And how much damage are we going to do with it that is or is not irreversible?
Right.
Big questions. And, we live these days where the floods are, quick. There's crazy weathers, things going on with the fires, with the tornadoes in all random places.
Sure.
So those are the things that I guess is not like right in your face all the time, but I think it's probably something we got to figure out.
And for us too, the how lucky we are to be living in the Western world, where quite often, like when you look at climate change and how it doesn't impact us the same way it might impact somebody who's living on some island in the South Pacific, where it's actually water coming to their doorstep. And one of the things I think about quite often in this debate, because there's lots of people who make, their arguments that it's not happening or it's not real or that it's just, the natural warming of the planet that happens every, few thousand years. And I'm always open to everyone else's perspective on this. Fine. Like, let me know what you think. My perspective is it almost doesn't matter. Like, let's just say we're currently going through just a natural warming of the planet, or let's just say it's all happening because of global warming and because of like man-made destruction. It doesn't matter which one it is. If there's somebody on an island who water is now hitting their door, we should still tackle that. If we're experiencing situations where we're having, hurricanes and floods and forest fires, we should still ask ourselves, what can we do? Let's stop arguing about where the problem is coming from, but rather do something about it. And when you talk about the haves and have-nots, sometimes I think that is, in fact, ironically, the solution for these massive problems, because it almost feels like there'd be a domino effect. If we could fix this, disparity between the rich and the poor, I believe that there could be a domino effect in how it affects everything else. What do you think?
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, the fault and origin of why it's all happened is really kind of a secondary piece there. I think there's so much population in that sort of underdeveloped world that absolutely that that could be something that could be a huge impact to all the things that, the smaller population. We're talking about the 1% versus the 99% almost, right? Where we're, all really, needing all of the things that we are comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And those are causing, major pollution, major carbon, the releases into the air and greenhouse gases. And, what if the rest of the world were to do the exact same thing? How dangerous could that be? Now, what if they were to do it completely differently? Yeah. And how much could they actually benefit the rest of the world? And so it's a real, I think a real worthy challenge to kind of figure out a solution to.
And even an exciting challenge. I think that sometimes when we look at the challenges that we face in the world, whether it's homelessness or housing or global warming, you name it, I think that often we look at it like oh my God, it's so heavy. Oh my God, I don't know what to do about it. I'm just going to bury my head in the sand. Whereas it's like, hey, guess what? You know what? It can also be an exciting thing, an exciting opportunity to look at the world around you and to ask yourself, who am I in relationship to this, and who can I be, or who can my family be, or how can I affect my community in positive ways that do just at least my part? Because, when you try to think about the idea of solving any of these massive problems on your own, guess what? I can see why it's overwhelming. But when you think about the idea of like the little things you can do within your own communities, that can be really exciting. And then you get to see the real-time change based on the actions that you take. So, I think the one thing that we got to be careful of is to not become complacent. And I see this with myself sometimes where I just think, oh, you know what? It doesn't matter. Anything I say or anything I do, it doesn't matter. And then I have to kind of redirect myself back into, you know what? Just focus on your community. Yeah, do what you can here, and see what kind of changes you can make. Back to the conversation on the disparity between the rich and the poor. I read something recently that really struck me, and now bringing in the whole conversation of AI. Yeah, and what they're talking about now is that disparity could become even bigger simply because it's affluent families that are accessing AI quicker than those who are from a lower socioeconomic situation, and in most cases, people who are, let's say, from poor neighborhoods aren't even accessing AI at all, not even on their radar. Whereas you've got people who are from affluent, backgrounds, and they are accessing it quickly today. Mm-hmm. And to me, when I think about that, yet again, it doesn't not just give the rich a greater advantage over the poor. And so, I mean, this whole AI thing, man, it's like interesting how it's going to play out.
It's so early, right? And I'm not by any means an expert or even very well educated on like the phases and the waves of it all. But I mean, we know about it here, obviously in North America, and now it's like what you have to get into it and learn it, as they say. This is basically the 2000s for the internet,
right?
And we're at the very, very scratching of the surfaces for it, and so it could be really great or it could be really scary and all that. And again, it's a really good thought. How will this impact for better or worse those sort of developing countries and folks that don't have access to the data technology, and maybe they can though. I was thinking you were going to go the other way actually about that. That
all right.
I thought AI could be the balancing factor. Mm-hmm. Again, dream as you will. What could it be? And it could be universal income and whatever. And so. How could that apply to countries through, some sort of magic, almost we call it. I mean, some sort of technology that would actually, level the playing field a bit. I mean, it's still it's at a place where I think we are dreaming what that could be. And what I fear for that in a way, not to get all the way down the road on AI at all, but it's like, what is the current globe and the pulse of the whole of humanity's mindset? Is it worry or is it more hope? And
Right.
if it's worry, we may create something that, manifests itself. And if it's hope, hopefully then that will then create, well, we want this to be the future, and AI then can help support establish that, like, solving some of these bigger problems. A dream as it may be, but as we have now more and more technology and resources put against it, we don't know yet, right? What
Yeah.
what it will become.
It's a great point, right? I mean, it's a whole self-fulfilling prophecy. What you believe becomes, and I like that perspective on things. Where if we have a choice, which we do, why don't we just choose to assume that it's going to do really great things, while obviously doing what we can to put regulations in place to make sure that those who have nefarious perspectives and agendas don't end up utilizing it for bad. But let's have hope, because one of the things I saw recently that I thought was so great. They were talking about how we are now soon going to be entering into a space where we will be seeing for the first time ever billion-dollar companies that are run by one person.
Wow.
And because of the use of AI, because you can essentially be a team of 200 if you know how to utilize it properly. And yet you are only one person who's running the actual organization. So that can be scary, of course. We can look at it from that perspective, but it can also be really exciting where maybe somebody who does come from perhaps a disadvantaged community but has the know-how and the brains to tap into the resources of AI to say, I'm going to create a $1 billion company here from my basement of my parents' house,
Hmm.
and I'm going to use that money to impact my own community in a positive way. I'm going to be the one that brings in the libraries and the pools and the resources that we need. I mean, that's where I think you have to have the hope, because now
Hmm.
it can be utilized in a way for good. And I guess the we'll have to wait and see. And when I think about this, it leads me to another question, and that is, do you feel like is this just all part of the process? Like, do you think that the suffering that we do go through, whether it is global warming or whether it is the disparity between the rich and the poor, is it just part of the human condition? Is it something that we should just stop fighting and start embracing and seeing it as part of our evolution?
That's another, yeah, interesting question. And I guess my first thought around that would be, again, bias to my environment in Canada and Toronto, and I think what I've seen is it is a little bit inevitable. People want more.
Mm-hmm.
We all want so much of the material things that we think are going to make us happy, and it doesn't. I don't think, but we still seem to want it, and that creates our own sort of suffering. And that's my
Mm-hmm.
sort of bit of attachment theory, right? Where you'd think people would want to be able to be happier with less. Well, where's your point of contentment? But that doesn't seem to be the general norm. People want the next boat, the next cottage, the rat race that we're in, the next title, and you'll never have it all. You'll never have all the money in the world, and so that, I think, breeds its own sort of suffering in its own way, and it's sort of unfortunate, of course, because we're already, as I said to you, but as we've talked about before, we're all kind of part of the top, kind of the 1%, and is that good or not good? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends what you do with it, right?
Hmm.
It's true, though, what you say about this kind of self-inflicted suffering that we put onto ourselves, and yeah, quite often it's that attachment to either things or titles or a certain level of success. And I always find it interesting when you see people who are famous in whatever category it may be, whether it's music or film or art, and they've literally reached the pinnacle of success. They got the Oscar, they won the World Cup, whatever it might be, they got the Grammy. And you find out later on that while they're being interviewed, that these were some of the darkest periods of their lives, where they felt like they still weren't good enough. They still weren't the prettiest person at the
Yeah.
party. They still weren't the most successful. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I won an Oscar, but then I went to a party and I bumped into such and such an actor and he's won 3 Oscars. I haven't won 3. I've only won 1.
Right.
And it's just this constant battle of never feeling like you've attained enough. Now, it's easy to use an example of like that when you're using one of, let's say, the Oscars or the Grammys or whatever it may be. But it happens to us too,
Absolutely.
where, you and I both know people who have found themselves in situations where they do get the CEO title, they do get the VP, the director title, whatever it might be. And they're like, well, yeah, but I'm not the VP of a Fortune 500 company. Oh, but I only have 300 direct reports. My friend has 500 direct reports. Whatever criteria they choose to use, it's always easy to find something to make yourself feel bad about yourself.
And it's a choice, very much so. You can use it. I think that perspective is actually it's all about the perspective and the if you've got this carrot, whatever that might be, and you can use it in a healthy way, that it's motivation and something that drives you to try to achieve is one way. I think that's a good way. But if you get to a point where it creates some sort of baggage, and that you just create this sort of vicious cycle that you don't have it and you can't get it, and you create a bit more of a I call it officially suffering, and it isn't something that will help you in any way at all.
No.
And it's all choice by your own mindset, isn't it? And maybe there's influence in your environment, but at the end of the day, I think it's an interesting situation where, again, those that have seemingly pretty comfortable lives, stable governments, education, healthcare access, and such. We seem to have so many problems, and I'd like to add this one thing that I see, of course, on social media, right? But they say you have all these problems. Of course, you've got money problems, you've got whatever health or I mean relationship problems, and at the end of the day, until you have a problem with your health, then you only have one problem.
Yes.
And so it's in our kind of vintage, again, I think it's something that comes to mind. How do you kind of continue to be healthy and get ahead of father time and such?
It's about really focusing on what matters the most. And it's incredible to me how so many people can be so focused on things that are so meaningless, and they make that the most important kind of focal point of their day. I had a situation just on the weekend where I was going to take my kids and their friends to Coney Island, kind of an impromptu, let's go to Coney Island. And I told them there's a festival going on there. And my daughter's friend, the first thing that out of her mouth was, can we buy something? And I said, what do you mean when you say that? She said, well, are there going to be things that we can buy? And I said, elaborate. What do you mean? Well, you said there's going to be a festival. Are there going to be things that we can buy for ourselves? I'm like, I don't know, but that's not why we're going. We're going to look around. We're going to see a parade, maybe go on some rides. Well, I really want to buy something. And I said, why? She goes, I just like buying things. And I thought, oh my God, this is a 9-year-old girl who clearly is living in an environment where more likely than not, she points to something, mommy or daddy buys it for them or gives them money. And she's been already teaching herself that, the true dopamine rush comes from purchasing something. And you fast forward, and I was at a happy hour bar kind of outdoor patio recently, like last week, I think it was. And I was overhearing this woman who I would say is probably in her early 20s. And she was talking about purchasing things. And I overheard her say to her girlfriend, she's like, I don't think it's a problem. She goes, just for me, that's just the way that I relax. So every night I, just open my laptop and I scroll through, the different, my favorite fashion websites. And I just kind of see what they're up to date, what's selling. And then, sometimes I purchase something, sometimes I don't, sometimes I'm just looking. And I thought to myself, every night? Every night? Like, you do that? And there's nothing wrong with once in a while, but like, this is something that at some point we need to start asking ourselves, the suffering that we're putting ourselves through, which is, I just have to get the next outfit. I just have to get the next, dopamine rush. I have to get the next, thumbs up from somebody on social media. It just doesn't end. And people are not seeing it as a state of suffering.
I think they don't. I mean, it's hard to define. It's self-induced, I guess. If it is suffering in their eyes, it's probably not until it's built up to a point where you're looking back, you're like, gosh, like I spent all this time chasing whatever that X thing is.
Right.
And now am I happy or not? Right. And I think I do that a lot anyway.
Yeah.
And we all are part of that. None of us are outside of that. And it's that getting to that point of spirituality to some degree to say, what's really why we're doing that? And what can I do about wanting what I want?
Yes.
and what's the end state of this at the end of the day? 3 years, 5 years, 20 years from now.
Right.
But you don't think about that on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis. You just kind of go through those motions to some degree. But it probably, for me, it's important to reflect back at times, right? At certain pivotal points, maybe it's half decade, milestones, or you get to 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever, and you look back. So, and it's interesting in this chat that we're having, it's kind of triggering these questions, right? About why are we doing what we do?
Yes.
As you ask it directly.
well, and this is one of our taglines, we'll say and I say this to a lot to my corporate clients. I'll say, the deeper the question, the deeper the answer, the deeper the answer, the deeper the connection with others and with yourself. And so if I ask myself, for example, here's a question I asked myself the other day. I said, and I don't know where it came from. I was literally just having a quiet moment, and I thought, what is your place in this world, Stuart? And said differently, some people might say, what is your purpose? But you can say it 1,000 different ways. But I'm like, what is your place in this world? And I thought I knew the answer. I thought it was always like, I'm here to hopefully make the world a better place, to motivate people to live out their dreams, and on and on and on and on. But I realized that maybe there was a more perhaps nuanced answer to it that I had not necessarily been focusing on or paying attention to. And it just allowed me to go deeper within myself. And so I think we need to remember to ask ourselves these deep questions, because it really is the stuff that matters the most. It's that relationship that we have with ourselves, and it's the relationship that we have with others that is always going to trump the feelings that we might get from buying a new pair of shoes, or getting a new title, or getting a new BMW, or whatever it might be. And I often say this to, again, during my corporate keynotes, I'll say to my client or to my audience, I'll say, look, at the end of our lives, when we look back, it was always the people that mattered the most. It was our laughter with them, our tears with them, our adventures with them that we look back at. No one looks back and remembers, the first cool pair of sneakers that they purchased, right? They might if you ask them, but it's not top of mind. As they're having those final days on planet Earth, it's the relationships. And that's really what matters the most. And I think that's where true meaning comes from. In fact, let me ask you this. Now that we're talking about this, do you think there's meaning to life?
Oh, yeah, I think there's meaning to life. I think in my mind, and I want to circle back to what you said there later, but in my mind, it's about free choice. I think that's what we're here to do. We're able to use our ability to choose to make the best decisions for ourselves, which then extend to our families, our friends, our communities, our country, and the broader planet Earth, as you say, right? So I think it's really that, like really trying to know yourself is one of the things. And maybe I'm going down the path of a bit more Buddhist or Confucius sort of life, but I'm not really in any of those camps in personal religion in that official way. But I think that's where I would say I look at the way I see life is, what do I really know about myself, and how can I really be true to who I want to be and who I should be and am originally really am, and then really kind of expand that towards the folks that are a part of it.
Right.
But if you don't know yourself, then you're just kind of playing the roles that kind of fall in your lap, I guess, right? You're a son, you're a father, you're a friend, and whatever those people's expectations are, you kind of, I guess, cling on to because you don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to think about. And I think going back to that last point you made about, meaning and these bigger, deeper questions, like we really spend so little time thinking about that, and all the time thinking about those, I'd call it maybe, in my opinion, superficial things, right?
Right.
Will I sound smart in this meeting? Will they think I am a good leader? Will, all these things in business and in life. I just think it's an interesting observation, in my opinion, that we spend very little time really thinking about the more, bigger questions, harder questions,
right.
Connections that we really feel it's important. And we really live in that world that's always just like, it's the email that comes through, you see it, you respond, and it's the unimportant but urgent box.
Right.
That, again, gives you that little dopamine hit, I guess. And it is who we all are to some degree.
Yeah.
Unless you're really sitting out there in the forest as a Buddhist monk or whatnot. We live in the life. So how do you live in this world without being so much entirely enveloped by it all the time?
Yeah.
That's my thought about the meaning is figuring it out. That is it. It's not that
Yeah.
complicated.
Do you think people are afraid that if they do go deeper into trying to see what they are and who they are, that they will uncover parts of themselves that are scary, and that's what stops them from doing it?
I think it's harder. Maybe that is
Yeah.
part of it. That it's a bit of fear and subconscious things if they're even close enough to that, where we are. But I think it's harder, right? You're so much easier to just scroll. It's so much easier to just answer that email because I know the answer to it, or it makes me feel good about knowing something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know how easy, and I think for me, it's not that easy to know yourself,
Yeah.
really. And it takes effort and time, and you have to carve that out. It's not in your everyday, open the fridge. Oh yeah, I'm gonna, it's just,
Yeah.
it's something that you kind of have to put a little more effort in because of the things that are really taking over a lot of the time that we spend in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think that's one of the things that I even get reminded of when I'm talking to my children, where they will say, "I want to be really great at something," or I don't want to practice the piano," or my son's like, "I really want to, be as good as Messi in soccer," and it's like, yeah, I get it, but it takes so much work to do things and to get there. For example, I'll say to my son, that one move that you're trying to get, he says, how many times do you think I should practice it? And he thinks my answer is going to be, if you just do it like maybe 50 times, you'll get there. And I always, I'll give him a crazy number. I'll be like 10,000 times, 20,000 times.
Yeah.
He'll be like, 20,000 times, Dad? I can't do the same move 20,000 times. Like, well, then that's what Messi did. Like they do it over and over and over again. Even just today, I was watching a clip of Steph Curry. And even as what's considered the greatest shooter of all time in basketball, he still goes out day in, day out with his coach, starts on the foul line, moves back a foot, and takes like 100 shots. So it is such a commitment to greatness. And that is something that we have to remember in every aspect of our lives. And if we want to have a great experience of life on planet Earth, we're going to have to do the heavy lifting. We're going to have to do the hard work. And we're going to have to go into some really ugly places. And it's through those ugly places that we come out and we get to see how beautiful we actually are. It's that great quote from Carl Jung where he says the only way out of it is through it. And everyone wants to go around it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you got to go through the shit, man, in order to get there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be you uncovering every childhood trauma from your life, but rather just kind of looking at yourself and going, maybe I'm not so cool when I make those jokes, or maybe I'm not showing up as the best partner as I could, and maybe there's areas for improvement. I think these are things that we have to realize.
Self-awareness is a start, right? The first step in that, I don't know many steps, but the program is admitting you have a problem, isn't it? Right.
Right. Yeah.
So if you don't even know, what are you going to, how do you even start working on something?
Yeah.
So I think it's probably lost and not really a focus, certainly not in the corporate world as much as many companies. I would quote back, one of the experiences I've had in a fairly evolved company, not to drop the name of it, but at the Green Dot, the Starbucks company, they really did really embrace the growth mindset, when I was there, and really think about vertical thinking, really think about, your true self. But nowhere else have I really seen any of that come through, that real neuroscience, the real kind of thinking that we are now, scientifically backed, how to really grow as a human.
Right. Yeah.
How does that not intersect?
I know. I actually have to throw so much science now at my clients to really get them to understand that human connection is actually something that's going to lead them to greater innovation, greater collaboration, greater productivity, less conflict, less absenteeism, a higher ease of being able to retain talent, because human beings for thousands of years, millions of years, have connected with each other in a meaningful way. And yet, if you don't show them the actual science behind what feels like sometimes these fluffy ideas, they don't want to look at it. And it's incredible because it's like a company like Starbucks is clearly embracing these ideas, which is to say, you know what, if we are going to maybe think about perhaps tapping into our emotional intelligence, our emotional quotients, our our ability to build relationships, or introspection, meditation, any one of these kind of like kumbaya types of subjects that most people look at, we are going to excel. And yet it's like so painstakingly hard to convince so many companies that that's a real thing.
Right. It's on one hand, it's understandable, right? It's all profit, bottom line, and EBITDA and everything else. On the other hand, and maybe it makes it an enabler for a company like Starbucks because they do service so many people.
Right.
Your customers, also your partners, your employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't invest in your people, they are actually part of what's going to disseminate into your, the barista that then serves you your morning coffee or latte or whatnot. And so maybe that makes it a little easier for that sort of a company.
Yeah.
But in the more, call it corporate-ish, real guest and customer facing companies, it's so much further away to really have to think about it as a person.
Right.
You're thinking about it as, we call it a business person, but that's not just a regular person. You're thinking about it from a business case standpoint. Do I have the right, ROI? And it's not about the human side of things.
Right.
But it's all about the people that'll do it.
Yes.
So it's a kind of a contradiction in a way. And I think in every company, it's an opportunity.
Right. Yeah, because that's just it, right? If you, what it's easy to pat yourself in the back if you're, having great revenues, great profits, but quite often what a lot of those companies miss is that your revenues could be even higher.
Sure.
Your profits could be even higher if you invest into the human side and not just be this person who's just cranking out productivity and just wrenching all the blood from every
last drop.
Yeah.
Last drop out of the lemon, right? And it's,
Yeah.
and it's really quite common now. And during, the sort of downturns of economy, we saw that in the boom bust, the big tech boom, right? And the bust of that. And I think it's somewhat happening, the last year or so and may still continue where it's a lot about productivity. It's all about how much can you cut and keep that. And there's an understanding to why you do that.
Sure,
But that really doesn't really put a lot of focus on, those doers and the people in the organization, the heartbeat, right? And it's a shame, I think, in this next kind of couple of cycles where it's not going to be just riding high and taking in the cash hand over fist. I mean, it's never really that easy that way, but it's in a tougher time right now. So
we gotta break the paradigm, I guess. And speaking of that, it's all about we often do so many of the things that we do based on the rules that we've all grown up with, or that we have learned to be the way in which a person is successful and happy and productive and whatever. What is a rule that you personally live by that you think, I like this rule, and I think that more people should consider living by it?
It's the best named rule, probably. My first thought would be, I'd say break the rules, maybe, right? And interpret your own, think for yourself. But the best rule, I guess, would be called the golden rule, I think. I think that one I do stand by where, you really have to put yourself in other people's shoes. Treat someone the way that you want to be treated.
Right.
And that's really again, back to being a human, right? It's important because, again, whether in whatever industry you're in, your reputation carries with you.
Yeah.
And I think that is important because, whether you're the top or the bottom of the hierarchy, you're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. Like, ideas can come out of anybody and anywhere. It doesn't matter what title they have. It just depends if they're heard.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the ones I'd like to say, I apply in all aspects of my life. And it also helps kind of put a mirror in front of you too at times, right? Where you're not always kind to everyone or yourself at times even. So, you've got both sides of that where you really think, do I really deserve this? If I'm dishing out what I'm dishing out, am I okay taking that back?
Right. It's so important. Yeah. I can't believe, I would have thought that at my age and, my experience in life that I would have got this one figured out. And I still have to remind myself about the importance of putting myself into other people's shoes,
right,
and recognizing where they're coming from. I'll give you an example. One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is when I see people who use their phone on speakerphone. And whether they're having a conversation or they're watching a YouTube video or they're listening to a podcast or whatever it might be. And not only that, it always seems to be cranked to the highest volume.
Right.
And I look at this individual and they're sitting next to you on the subway, they're sitting next to you in a cafe or in a restaurant, and you think, is it not even like, it just hasn't dawned on you
No.
that that might be intrusive to other people's quiet time, personal space, you name it.
Hmm.
And recently, I have really just been having conversations with myself about that and saying, Stuart, in their world, in their reality, they actually have no idea that what they're doing is troublesome to other people. And because you are getting mad at a person who you think knows what they're doing is troublesome and they're still doing it on purpose. That's the story you're creating in your head. But the truth is that that person is not aware in many cases. Now, in some cases they are, and they just don't give a crap.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to me because I've on some occasions now even said to somebody, hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Been super polite about it. But do you have earbuds or do you have headphones? And I've been surprised at how often a person goes, "Oh God, oh gosh, I'm so sorry." It was like it just wasn't even part of their self-awareness, as you said earlier on, and it is something that has been so helpful for me because it has caused me to become so much less angry all the time by putting myself into that person's shoes and realizing the world by which they live in is not the same world you live in. And once you understand that, it makes you less upset about the way that one person might act that may not necessarily be congruent with the way you act.
Absolutely, and it's all the little things of life and the things that you experience. I interpret that to like road rage. You see,
Yeah.
you're just losing it, right? And people are just totally ignorant and have no idea that they've done something that really sets you off, and you're just riveting. You're so angry, and you're doing it to yourself, and that really escalates at times to a place where it's like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But they have no idea, and if you looked into it, I also think about it at times to say, hey, you don't know what's going on in their day. Maybe they've got to rush somebody to a hospital. Probably not going to happen. Most of the time, that's not the case.
Right.
But you just don't know, right? You don't know what's going through somebody's brain at that moment, that day for them.
Yeah.
And I try to at times and fail most times, but have some level of empathy to say, I guess this is what they're at, and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's not, and you also think a little bit at times. Thank goodness I'm not there. Actually, a little bit. Like if maybe they've done through something so bad that this is how it's kind of now materializing in this moment. Maybe not on the speaker, but in some other ways.
Yeah.
I think I worry, like, gosh, thank goodness I'm not so grumpy or miserable or impatient. Something must have really gone poorly for them, right? And wouldn't they benefit from having a little ounce of, whatever, undeserved kindness, maybe?
Right. There was this one time when you're talking, it reminds me, I'll never forget, I was with one of my best friends, and we're downtown Toronto, and it was rush hour. And so on College Street, which is a busy street in Toronto, for those of you who don't live there, all this traffic was completely backed up, and we were just trying to inch across College to keep on going south. And we're just waiting for an opening. And while it's happening, we see this one guy who's in his car, and he's right in front of us, and he's passing us, just inching along, screaming at the top of his lungs. Now his windows are up, so we can't hear him. Screaming at the person, so angry, like literally frothing from the mouth, punching his steering wheel. You can see him just moving his legs around like he's having a temper tantrum. And while he's doing it, my buddy and I are watching him, and we are killing ourselves laughing because he doesn't know we're watching it. When we just think this is the greatest television show of all time. Look at this guy. And while he's doing it, he just happens to glance to his right, and he happens to look at us, looking at him in the eyes, and we're laughing. And he just pauses for a second, and then he starts laughing.
Wow.
He starts, and he kind of almost gets the joke. And it was in that moment that he realized, oh my God, what am I doing? And all three of us were pointing at each other, and we were all sharing this wonderful laugh together. And it was that snapped him out of it and made him realize, what am I doing? Like, what the hell am I doing? But you know what?
It's so funny.
It is so funny. So, and this kind of makes me think about how people look at us the way that we act, and they can make assumptions about who we are. And quite often that is not, in this case, for example, that's not who he truly is. He's just having a moment. He's probably a good guy. In your own life, how does that, turn up in the sense like, how do people sometimes commonly misunderstand you in the person that you are?
I guess the thought I have here right away is, I always used to think I have to wear glasses. I'll start with like kind of 15 years ago. People would always think, you're too young to be taken seriously. So I try to look older, right? I don't have that problem nearly as much now. But people do put labels on you. And now, being in the function of sales, they're like, this has been said to me on the regular that, oh, it's a sales guy, right? And so you must not think for the whole business, and it might just be really you're on the payroll of the customer or whatnot. It is interesting. I find you're gonna get pigeonholed at times, and all the time. I think, in their perspective, and that's okay, right? To some degree, It may irk you. It does irk me that I can't just be a general manager, a general leader, right? Not just a one trick pony or whatnot. And I think that's one of the things I have seen, kind of in business, but also in everyday life. I think, because of my ethnicity and my stature, I'm not a 6'4" Caucasian blonde male.
Right.
And some people might think I'm really timid or shy and I'm not knowing me and a pushover because I'm nice. And guess, it's not the case. Like, when you get to know somebody, you really see who they really are. And there's the generalization, I think, where, because of the way you look, the title you might have, you have been generalized and been put in a box already.
Right.
And I think that's one of those misconceptions. I think you really need to get to know somebody to really know who they are, and not necessarily put a label on them right away.
Do you ever look back at your life, or even maybe in present day life, find yourself acting in a way that is almost embarrassing because you're trying to overcompensate and kind of go, well, you know what? Like, I have a label on me that I'm timid. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a meeting, maybe being abrasive. And then you walk out of that meeting like, why was I acting like that? I'm just trying to prove something that I'm not. Like, if you ever find yourself, because I know that I've done that where I want to be seen some way, and then I walk away and I'm embarrassed at myself. I'm like, that wasn't that who you are. Why are you so dependent on other people seeing you that way?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it happens often, and that's not a huge example, but I think, for me, we try to please people all the time, and we try to make sure we overcompensate, exactly as you said, to prove that I'm actually really creative, or I'm a great listener at times, and I just say nothing, or some of those things I think permeate it more so in my personal life, where my wife is a bit of a can't call it a hoarder, but she likes to keep things.
My wife's same over here.
Doesn't like to get rid of something. You move it from one room to then you move it to the locker or the closet, and then you move it to the car, and you move it back. And I'm like, you're just moving stuff around. Why don't you just, throw it down the chute?
My partner just went to Jamaica for 5 days, and I cleaned house. It was awesome. She came back. She won't even know.
But overcompensating there, I'm like, I have very little things here, it seems like, because I've just thrown everything out that I possibly could own in it. And the worst thing, and I think this comes to mind, is like, I threw out all my pictures.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I'm like, why did I, the physical books, right? For those that are more of the digital age, like the printouts, those albums. And I had those through my grade school. And I was like, you know what? Wait, gone. We're making a little bit of space here for, you need to clear stuff out. And I'm like, maybe I overdid it there, right? Or, it's just, you do overcompensate at times for others and for your own, like, what? I can do so well. I can throw everything away.
Right. Yeah.
I actually really need.
Yeah. He's like, I'm going to show the world, this version of myself. And then you do it and you're like, that was dumb. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. It's interesting, especially in business though. And I know that there is so much pressure for people working in, any kind of corporate environment. To maybe feel like they need to be louder, or they need to be look smarter, or they need to somehow say things that will compensate for their own insecurities. I have done this, and I still make this joke in so many of my keynotes, where at the beginning of the keynote, and I've gone through the same thing that you've gone through, which is usually now not today, but looking younger than what I was. And here I would be, let's say, at the age of 36, and I'd be up in front of 500 people, and I'm thinking they all think I look like I'm 25. And so I would say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, how are you today? Thanks for being, it's really great. In my life, in my 36 years on life, this is when I was 36. I'm almost 52 now. But even at the age of almost 52, I'd say, in my 51 years of life, and I'd always pause and go, I know, I look like I'm 50, but I'm actually 51. And it would just be my little way of getting my age on the table. And that was my own insecurity of feeling like, I want these people to take me seriously. And it's only recently that I thought maybe I'm going to kill that joke and not say it anymore. And
So funny.
I have been saying it less, right? But in
Okay.
your case, it was glasses. You put glasses on to look older.
It's something, right? You try to compensate for things that you think is a disadvantage, that whether it is or it isn't, and that's all about the insecurity. I think at the end of the day,
this is it.
And they may be real or not. It's tough, right? At the end of the day, after this, 44 years for me,
Right.
being
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
planet, I think the answer is always authenticity.
Yeah.
I think you try to be you. You try to be the best you. And that's one of the things that I think we often do get sidetracked from being just who we are,
Yeah.
and it's hard, and we wonder why.
Right.
It's not hard to keep track of the truth. We start making things up or whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to keep track of what you said to whoever if you don't, just to speak from the heart.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I'd say that was one of the thoughts I have.
It's the easiest go-to. Just be yourself. Speaking of yourself, you at one point just now said creativity, and you started kind of alluding to other things that are part of you that people don't know. What do you have? What's a hidden talent, or what's a hidden kind of like little thing that would cause people to go, "Really? I didn't know that about you, Jeff," or a hidden, something that that maybe other people don't know about you. Anything come to mind?
The only thing that's a bit cheesy, but this is who I think I am anyway, is I have this talent. I think that I genuinely am interested in people, in everybody. I have
Right.
genuine interest and curiosity around someone's life and what brought them to where they are today. And maybe that's why I'm in sort of this function of sales, right? It's really kind of, and I am curious, like good, bad, or ugly, right? Like, how did you end up, being this successful, or this, perhaps opposite of that, right? And what were the challenges that brought you to, sitting outside, looking for an extra couple bucks or whatever, right? On the streets. It's interesting to me. I just find people, they're all snowflakes, right? Everyone's different.
Yeah.
And there's a story there, and I find that very interesting to learn about it when you have an opportunity.
Do you ever find yourself wondering why more people aren't curious?
I guess the thought that comes to mind would be they're too busy, right? And they're consumed with who they are. Like I want to do this, and not they. And who are they and others?
Right.
I think we have, and that's understandable. I think we all have that too. Actually, like we're often consumed with what our problems are.
Yeah.
And what we are, dealing with and thinking about inside our own heads, rather than really, probably opening it up and thinking in the right opportunity, in the right, other person at times. They'll really teach you a ton.
Yeah.
But I don't think everyone is. If you haven't put yourself in that position to really connect or be genuine in wanting to know another person, that you don't necessarily need to know. We're not talking about your kids or your partner, about just some old random person or whatnot.
Yeah.
Then you'll never get that sort of growth, I guess you could say.
Right. It's phenomenal to me when I think about how incredible human beings are. And as you said, I like, the fact that everyone is different, their own snowflake. And I'm always saddened by observing so many people that don't take the time to get to know on a deeper level, whether it is their partner, their kids, their neighbor, their colleagues, their customer, the person that they report to, whoever it might be. It's like there are so many fascinating things to learn about people if you just ask. I mean, even last night I'd gone to a show. My friend was in town, and we went to a musical in Times Square, and she said, "Oh, let's go to that little rooftop bar over there and have a catch up." So we went over, and I'm chatting with the bartender, and I don't even know how it came up, but I asked, "How do you like working here?" It's good. And it's like I just asked a few questions, and the few questions led me to finding out that he had been a performer for 15 years professionally, and then one day he was on stage and he was dancing with this woman, and he went and dipped her, and he blew a disc in his back or something like this, and it sidelined his career for many, many years. And he said, and I'm just getting back into it. I'm in fact going for my very first audition in 5 years tomorrow.
Right.
And it was just such an interesting conversation to learn about this person's life. And it only took 5 minutes. And again, it wouldn't have happened had the question not been asked.
Yeah.
And I'm always blown away by why no one's asking anybody any questions. Like, you're in sales, all these customers, yes, eventually you have to sell the product. We get it. But before that, like, so where are you from? And like, what was your upbringing like? And what kind of places have you traveled to? Like, let's get to know each other as humans. And
Yeah.
that way, if we don't get the sale, at least I had that interesting interaction with you.
Absolutely. And it's really, that is sales actually, right? I think is actually being genuinely interested in people, I think maybe,
Yeah.
and understanding what makes them tick and without being too, generalistic or cheesy in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that sort of script that you see on TV, right? That used car salesman pitch. But I think it's about, we're taking the time, being a little bit brave sometimes, whether it's in the work or otherwise. I think people don't always think they have the permission to ask, and they are, like kids. I don't think they are afraid of talking to anybody sometimes.
Yeah.
And it comes with time and practice and repetition. I just think, but not all people get something out of it as well, right? And so there's a few things I think that create that sort of closed door, closed-mindedness, you can call it, but also, hey, that's who they are. It's okay too.
Yeah.
Not everyone's the same, right? And
True. That's their own journey. But you nailed it when you said it takes practice, because that's one of the things that I often encourage people to do, which is to say, listen, just once in a while, maybe this week, ask somebody, whether it's a colleague or a customer or a client, ask a question you wouldn't normally feel comfortable asking. And when you do, you will find that that individual isn't afraid to answer the question. And it doesn't have to be astronomical, but instead of saying, to a new customer, how long have you lived in the city for? Say, what's one of your favorite things about living in the city? It's not a humongous change from the first question, but it's one that you've never asked. And that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you'll quickly find that the person will answer it and will give you a great answer. And when they do, just expand on that. Yeah. And once a person's done that, they've created a new benchmark for themselves. And then from there, they can use that as a place to leap from for their next question. And you can go even further. And eventually you're going to hit a ceiling, because let's face it, there's only so personal, there's only we can only get so personal with a person in business. But when it comes right down to it, most people don't realize you can go so much further than what you're giving yourself permission to. And if you just practice and try it from time to time, you'll see that you can go further than you ever imagined.
And that goes back a number of years. We've met many years, as we said before, in level 2, level 3, level 4 questions. And the art of conversation was something I've learned from a good friend, Stuart.
That's funny.
And I think it's real. I think it's something that comes to mind, things that you learn and things that stick with you. Those are the things, and really wanting to ask and learn more. And I think the other piece to it comes to mind is just the word vulnerability. Maybe it's cheesy again, but it is that. You can't get anything if you're not going to give anything.
Right.
You have to put yourself out there a bit. Again, not fakely, that's the word. You have to give yourself a little bit of that risk, take that chance to be like, hey, this is something I've gone through. Yeah. This is something that I'm curious about. And you don't know the answer. You can't script life, right? And and you got to give a little bit in order to really kind of let somebody, and they may not give you anything back even. That's okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the whole point, right? I often say to people, when you take these chances, you ask better questions. Don't go thinking it's gonna work every single time. It's just going to work more often, and that is what makes life better and makes it more interesting. Is because you're just going and you're taking a little bit of risk. You're pushing yourself a little bit further. And that I love that about you. I love that's something that you're proud of, and something that is a quality that you like. Now, what is something that you'd like to improve upon on the flip side of that question? An area where you think, I'd like to be just a bit better in that area of my life.
I think this has been a long time coming. I think it's a single word answer of communication, and I flaw there, right? I want to be concise and choiceful in my words, and be intentional. Mm-hmm. And be thoughtful and be measured.
Right.
I think I can communicate-ish, but there's so much further you can go, right? And I think of like a guy like Barack Obama, and hearing him, and even the pace of his speech, my pace of my speech, right? And you compare, but people say I speak too quickly, and you'll see. I think it's important. One of the most important things is to be a good communicator in business and in life.
Yeah.
To be able to articulate clearly, so someone can follow you, and someone can then, you know, really understand and as efficiently as possible what you
Right.
want and what you're intending.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the number one thing. Period.
Yeah.
Communication.
Just continuously be, improving upon the way that you communicate. That's a great one. And a lot of these things, let's face it, we learn from our parents.
Hmm.
I often encourage parents to really to look for ways to teach their children those communication skills. I try to do this with my own kids, where we might bump into somebody on the street, and it's a Monday, and it's a parent with their child, and I might even say to my child, "Hey, do you have any questions for the parent?" And my children will go, "How was your weekend?" And I'll say, "That's great." And then the parent will say, "It was really good." And I'll say, "No, why don't you ask them, what the best part of their weekend was?"
Hmm.
And my child will be like, "What was it?" They're just repeating what I said. And we're having fun with it, and the parent's laughing. But I know that even through the jokes, I'm teaching them that importance of learning how to communicate, because it's going to be such an important life skill later on. And now is the time to learn it. And I had a moment that kind of almost brought tears to my eyes recently, where I was walking my daughter to her ballet lesson, and she bumped into one of her friends who was being walked there by her babysitter. And so the four of us are walking down the street, and I got to be honest with you, it was just one of those days where I wasn't in the mood to be my usual talkative self. So I was just letting the girls talk to each other, and I was just listening. So we're walking down the street, and there was a pause that went by, and it was quiet. And all of a sudden, my daughter turns to the other girl, and as a reminder, they're 9 years old, and she
Right.
says, "So, what are some of your favorite things to do?" And it was so cute, because I realized she's trying to create a conversation. And this question didn't really, segue from anything that had been said before. So it kind of came from nowhere. And the other girl goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And she says, "Well, like, what are your favorite things?" And the little girl goes, "Well, and she started talking about some of her favorite things. And then my daughter started talking about some of her favorite things. And I was like, oh my God, it does parenting, like, as hard as it is, once in a while you have these little wins. And,
So many that you don't even know about, though,
that's
right?
right.
You
Yeah.
don't always see them
Yes.
because you just so happen to be there and then quietly, reflecting and whatnot, and it's incredible. Like, that's where I think, and I mean, you can never be around them all the time, right?
Right.
So, but the things that you've said to them are there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we hope it's good.
For the most part, and they're going to learn some bad things from us
Oh, yeah.
too.
Sure.
Hey, how do you, out of curiosity, now that you are a father, and you've been in a relationship for a long time, and you're now coming to that middle part of your life, how do you see your parents differently, or based on your own life experiences?
I mean, I think there's been, as we get older, they get older, and 5 years ago, my mom passed away, and
Okay, I didn't know
so
that.
yeah, it happens. Nobody lives indefinitely, and so it's something
Mm,
about happening, but then actually, having to experience that, and for me, the way I look back at what she was at the time versus today,
mm,
it's different, foundationally, and now being a dad of two girls, it changes the way you realize how much of an impact every word she had used to say and had left with me, and who she is and how she parents, and the sacrifice that she made, coming in from Hong Kong at a young age, not knowing the language. I think that appreciation, it really evolves, as you get older and become a parent. And there's things that you don't, they're not all good, right? And that won't happen with me either, for sure. And you really just try to be more mindful about that, where, whatever I whoever I am as a role model, and the things I say, um, it has a pretty lasting impact to them, well
right.
beyond my life.
Mm.
So
So,
I
what would
think
you say is, like, what was one of the biggest things she taught you in life?
I think what she taught me, I think, would be the one or two things. I don't, I'd say this openly. I think it's
Sure.
some of the things that she taught me not to be. Maybe,
Ah,
to be
interesting.
fair, I think this sort of it's weird because she was kind and patient a lot of times, but there were moments that she would just have had enough, and she was like pretty short.
Right.
And that sticks with me. And I'm like, ooh, be wise not to be out of control at times. You will be regardless,
Right.
but that's something that, they're watching and they're aware, and what you do is always going to be potentially with them. But I think, the biggest thing is probably the sacrifice, really, like thinking about my life and the opportunities I've been able to have being born in Toronto, Canada, with her moving away from her fairly established family in Hong Kong. It's 10 or 12 brothers and sisters. And, she's just left and moved to Toronto in Canada. And, from that, didn't have an easy life, and worked really hard. And so maybe that's a couple of things: it's sacrifice and hard work.
Yeah. I always find it increased, like the immigrant story is so crazy. Like my parents are immigrants as well, came to Canada with $150 in their pocket. My dad first lived in a tent. That was his first place. And then, finally got an apartment. Like every immigrant has some version of this story, right?
Sure.
And I just find it so phenomenal to think about how hard they work to get to where they are, to be able to provide for their family. And I try to remind myself of that when I start complaining about some of the difficulties I go through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's embarrassing when I think about it. So, I'm gonna make this my last question for you, and you kind of brought me into it. So we're talking about, the reality is that everyone passes on to the other side at some point, and it's not something we want to do, but we all have to do. So when you think about your own inevitable demise, what's one thing you feel like you just have to do before that time comes? Is there anything that jumps out at you?
The one or two things I'll say. One, I would love to say that I don't live with any regrets, but it's really reconciling that maybe, and kind of being more practical of what is it that I really want to see is really probably my kids at 25 and maybe seeing a grandchild,
Right.
That's kind of it,
Okay.
That's it. Like getting there, and taking care of our own health and our mental and physical kind of being.
Yeah.
You get to be able to enjoy as much time as possible with our own families, the most important people in our own lives. And I think that's probably it. I don't want to hold on to it. I think I've done, and I don't think I have anything I feel like I haven't been able to get. I want very little. I try to want very little so that I can be happy at any point in time to kick the bucket.
I love that.
It's, more time, and with that time, have it spent well.
So you're clearly focused on what matters and what's most important. I mean, you could have said, "Oh, I have to travel to, Italy before I die," or "I have to learn how to speak another language." You could have said any of those kinds of things, which are fine. But I love that you really are focused on, I want to make sure that we're healthy. I want to see my children grow up, and I want, to basically you focus on the love of your family, which is a lovely thing. So, and this is going to, allow you to stay in the good books with your wife because you gave the right answer.
Yeah, that's really the real answer, isn't it? No, it's absolutely true. I think it's great to really, be appreciative of what we all have, being on this podcast together, and connecting and learning from each other, and anybody that will teach you something. And speak to you.
That's it. Yeah, I know. I love it. There's been so many great nuggets that I've taken away from this conversation, and I think that the main thread here that we've both been kind of punching at a little bit is just be real, be vulnerable, be true to yourself, constantly ask questions, constantly look inward, and just be clear on what matters the most. And not get stressed about all the other stuff. Don't throw yourself into a state of suffering because of all the other stuff, because the other stuff doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Don't be so hard on ourselves. And we're all very much our worst critics.
Yeah.
Inevitably, just try to live above that if you can, and just not put that high of a pedestal for yourself that you can never achieve it. Even though we all do.
My friend Glenn one time said, he goes, "Isn't it sad to think that most people will die and that they will never have seen themselves as being as great as everyone else did?"
That's a great quote. That's a good thought.
Isn't that a great way? It's like, so many of us are so hard on ourselves that we just think, oh, everyone, this is the way that we think about this. But like, the truth is that if they were speaking at your funeral, what they would say about you are things that would make your chin drop. And it's important to start seeing yourself that way, because that's who you truly are, not the person you think you are. So with that, I want to say thank you for your sage, even though advice, even though you're not a Buddhist, you should become one because you sound like one.
No, thank you.
You had so many great things to share with everyone today, and we'll make sure that everyone knows where to find you. And if anyone wants to get connected with you on places like LinkedIn, and if you have any more questions for Jeff, you could go that route too. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy work day, because I know you got all kinds of back-to-back meetings, and for being on the show. It's been really special having you here.
Well, thank you for inviting me and giving me a little space within my day to really think about what's important.
Awesome, brother. You've been awesome, and I look forward to hearing more about what this sage man has to say in the future.